Awesome.
Welcome.
Go ahead,
You
Alex.
want to go ahead, or should I introduce you guys?
I'll let you intro us.
All right. So welcome everyone. Today we have the pleasure to meet Oscar, Ashley, Luke, and Hugo from Levvel, and we're going to learn about the different avenues they had to take to get into tech. We're going to hear a little bit about their journey and that brought them where they are now. So, Oscar, do you want to take it from here?
Yeah, thank you, Alex. I'm excited to be back. I've done a huddle and a skillet is planned in the near future with Code the Dream. So love the group. Always love the questions. So thank you for popping in. My name is Oscar. I grew up in Eastern North Carolina, originally from Mexico. And today I bring with me some colleagues from Levvel, an Endava company. We were acquired, but we're still transitioning into full Endava. And I'll let each one of us kind of walk through a little bit of our intro. I think we shared in advance a little bit in case y'all got to see that in the invite, but I'll start off with Hugo, just sharing a little bit about your background, where you're from, and what got you into tech.
Yeah, thank you, Oscar. Well, like I said, my name is Hugo. I was born and raised here in Charlotte, North Carolina. And, when I started my interest in tech was whenever I was starting to go to college. Unfortunately, as we all know, college is a little bit expensive. So unfortunately, I didn't have, the means to necessarily, pay and go forward with my degree. But I was still super interested and really wanted to be in the tech space. So I knew that I also wanted to change my career because I was working in retail at the time. So I decided to join a coding bootcamp. It's one here in Charlotte, Clicktown South. And it was a 6-month bootcamp. And throughout that, I learned, the back end, front end, and just kind of like a good background of tech. And after doing that bootcamp, I was able to get my first job at Bank of America, where I was there for 2 years. And then, now I'm at Levvel in Endava. So, my journey with tech has been a little bit, I won't say interesting, but a little bit different. But I know a lot of people now are trying to get into tech space, and I know boot camps are, a great way to kind of transition from, maybe a past kind of career and then, go into tech. So that was a little bit about me.
Thanks, Hugo, for sharing. I appreciate that. We'll pass it over to Luke.
Hey guys, I'm Luke. It's I went to college, went to Appalachian State, and actually majored in English. So out of English, after that, went abroad to go live in the Dominican Republic for a couple of years, where I taught English. It was a lot of fun, but only made it 2 years, and then moved back to Virginia, actually. And when I moved there, I started doing sales. I was working at like a hardware store called Fastenal. It was all right, but it definitely wasn't a career or anything. Everybody said I would be good at sales, so I kept going at sales for a couple of years. Eventually moved back to Greensboro, and I was still doing sales for something that was, have you heard of the Charlotte Business Journal? I think there's a Raleigh Business Journal, for the Greensboro version of that, selling advertising, print advertising. And it was okay. Somebody told me I should go see a career coach at about that time. So I saw a career coach, and she gave me a battery of tests, of personality tests, and what are you motivated by? How do you work with others? What interests you? And so after she analyzed all those tests, she said, Luke, based on all this, sales is a terrible idea for you. And I was like, oh, great. Well, but if you do project-based work, you have to stay stimulated and learn new things. People with your interests and abilities and skills and whatever tend to do really well with IT. So I didn't really have the means to go back to school full-time and start over to get a bachelor's or a master's in IT. So did community college to kind of figure out what I was interested in, and then ended up going with web-based technologies. And I think free resources out there can do a better job than what you can with most universities out there in terms of the web space, the way that things are changing all the time. So that was about 5 or 6 years ago, and I've kind of been teaching myself ever since. Been a lot of fun.
What a story, Luke. Thank you for sharing. I love the changes there, and really kind of it takes a hit when it's like, oh, you're doing the wrong thing for the past, however long time you did sales for.
Yeah, it's like, here's your butt. I'm going to hand it to you. I was like, oh, thank you.
That's funny. Well, thank you for sharing, Luke. I'll pass it over to Ashley.
Hey everybody, so I'm Ashley Grant. I'm our VP of Engineering here at Levvel. I also have a very windy career story of what got me here. My backstory is I took computer science in high school, fell in love with it, would find time on the weekends and afternoons after school to write my little C++ programs. Actually went to college for it, but as a young teen, got really scared. There was one female in the whole program at the college that I went to, and I shied away from it. I used to actually not tell that part of my story because I found shame in it, but I've realized the more I've told it, it's actually a much more common experience. I had never been faced with a lack of diversity in that way before. So life happened, finished college with a very different degree. Went to work in the wedding industry for a small business here in Charlotte for about 6 years. Kind of grew in that career and was kind of right hand to the business owner. And just started to see a lot of inefficiencies in how we did our work. We used Excel for pretty much everything. Everything was a manual process and how we ran the business. And there was a lot of just human error in doing that. It led to, frankly, the business losing money in some areas. And I knew software could solve that. And like, I got that itch again of like, holy crap, like technology can fix all of this stuff that we're dealing with. I want to build this. I know I could build this. I don't know how to do it though. I was married by that point in my life. So I told my husband, hey, I'm just going to go to the local university. I'm just going to take one class. But that first day, like the love just like came right back into me. And I was like, nah, like, this is what I was meant to do. Like, I don't care if like, I'm going to be the only female at this point in my class. Luckily progress had happened a little bit, so that wasn't true. But I went back to school. I worked full-time, went back to school full-time, tried to do both for a little bit, and then ended up with the wonderful support of my husband to just drop work and finish out a second degree. So I did go the second degree, full bachelor's degree. So I have a second one. Boot camps at that time were just starting to get a lot of traction, but they weren't widely known and widely available. So when I graduated with that degree, I was coming out with peers a lot younger than me. And I also found out I was pregnant the week I graduated. So we were expecting our first child. So not only was I entering this world with just a lot of imposter syndrome around like my age, but also like knowing in 9 months I was about to become a new mom too. And that like meant something completely different too. So I worked at a large financial services firm here in Charlotte for a couple of years, and then found my way to Levvel, just looking for a new experience at a small company where we could just try different things and how we support people and how we build teams. I was really interested in just different ways of building companies and doing things differently. So I've had that great opportunity here and I've loved it. But yeah, definitely had a very windy path to getting here.
I love that. I think one of the most interesting things when I first started sharing about my narrative as well, that kind of you don't even see where the bullets are connecting or the bubbles, kind of the dots are connecting. But when you look back, it all kind of makes sense. But moving forward, it doesn't, because you're just going into, the unknown and seeing that you definitely see the windy path afterwards. And I graduated with a major in math, didn't know I wanted to be a programmer. So I appreciate each of yours kind of narratives, and thank you for sharing that. Vulnerability is great to see, and definitely love that. Alex, do we want to make some questions, or do you want me to facilitate a couple of asks here?
If you want to facilitate a couple, and then we can just go on from there.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I shared this, so I hope y'all studied in advance. I was trying to prep y'all a little bit, but I think it's really great to hear kind of the narrative that y'all talked about, and then also going into that first job opportunity, right? I think a lot of people have nerves, and I still remember suffering from those nerves going into the interview, wondering what's going to happen, what is it going to look like, and I think I can appreciate from any bootcamp student and anyone self-teaching as well that nerves not ever being in an opportunity like that. So could y'all elaborate a little bit about your first opportunity and what you remember feeling going in, what was it like, and how did you feel coming out of it? We'll go with Luke.
Thanks. Let's see. So I actually did do a small little stint at a boot camp that only did one class. And I think I was the only one to get a job out of that one small class. But I was referred to this small little company in Burlington, North Carolina, that was a WordPress. Well, let me back up. The first thing that I did was get my CompTIA certificate so that I could be a level 1 support tech, because I knew that at the time I wouldn't be able to get where I wanted to be as my first step, but I knew that I could get to be a level 1 tech, and I knew that was a stepping stone. So that interview was fairly easy. I was definitely nervous, but nobody wants to just settle for the CompTIA or the level 1 support desk for a large company. But I knew that I was doing a little bit more work and figuring out where I wanted to be next. I was a little bit nervous, but not too nervous, because I knew that they really needed someone, and this particular job wasn't the best. But as it went up, those nerves got a little bit greater for my next job, which was a marketing / WordPress agency out of Burlington. I was referred there from a friend after that boot camp I went to, and I remember studying a lot. It was actually an internship, so I was close to 30 at the time applying for an internship, and I remember the guy sitting back and saying, well, you're a little different than the other people who have come through here. You're not a college student. I took that as a compliment, and ended up there for a little bit. Yeah, I was definitely nervous, and gosh, I don't know. Any specific questions about the interview process?
Yeah, we can roll into that after we kind of share about everyone's general experience of going into it, and pick point at specific, I think, techniques of what you can do now, looking back at what that looked like, right?
Yeah.
We'll go over to Ugo to share about what you felt going into your first opportunity.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, my first software engineering job was at Bank of America, and they're a very popular place to work here in Charlotte. A lot of people work there. So, and thankfully too, the boot camp had kind of a smaller like job placement and like interview practice kind of towards the end. So kind of that to me was a little bit helpful as well, just because going into like a tech interview, I would say it's a little bit of a different process than some of the interviews that I had taken like, prior to like other jobs. So, you know, there might be like 1 or 2 or 3 interviews that you might have to take depending on the position. So for me, you know, taking multiple interviews was, you know, like I think everyone's gonna say like a little nerve-wracking, just because, you know, you want to make sure you do your best in every interview. So, but you know, I think for me, just kind of studying really was what's kind of important going into these technical interviews, because you really never know what they might ask. You know, they might ask like a little bit of coding, they might ask, you know, more things about you, your work experience, what you really know. So it really just kind of depended. But you know, I think I did fine for my interview. You know, obviously getting the job was a big success, but I think, you know, going into it, I was definitely a little bit nervous, but definitely the boot camp helped a little bit just for like interview prep and a little job placement, trying to help me look for the position. So
Yeah, I think that's super awesome. Boot camps that offer kind of more of a holistic experience to also help you with the placement, the interviews, versus just, here are the classes, here it is, good luck. So I'm glad that that was an experience for you, Hugo. Ashley, how was your experience going into the first opportunity in tech?
Yeah, it has parallels to the take advantage of the support around you themes. So my first role was actually an internship. And I knew like I was ready for it. I wanted it. I applied to a whole bunch of places and nobody was calling me. And like, I was like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? I made this mistake. I quit my job. But I went to the career advisor and like, I just broke down and was like, hey, look, like, what am I doing wrong? And honestly, it was as simple as the way I was formatting my resume was wrong. And as soon as I reformatted it and moved things around and took his advice, like I started getting those calls. So it just like showed me the importance of like, hey, you have the support system around you to help you, like take advantage of it, use it. Stepping into that first opportunity was interesting. Again, like I said, I was a lot older than a lot of the peers around me, and we're at very different places in our lives. So that was interesting. I had to work through a lot of just imposter syndrome around that. But also understanding myself and how to present my previous experience, even though it wasn't directly related, like from a software development perspective, there was a lot of value in it. And I had to like realize that myself first and then figure out how to talk about that so employers could see that too. But that was something that I talked to a lot of individuals about as they're kind of coming out in untraditional paths and career changers. There's a lot of power in your previous experience and the things that you've done before that you can relate to what you're going after. So learning how to speak to that is really important as well in those processes.
Yeah, 100% agree with how you frame both your resume and your narrative is super important. So if you have a friend, I 100% recommend it, because my best friend heard my pitch for so many iterations of what I was practicing when trying to get into those, but more importantly, the behavioral questions, right? Because I think their soft skills are more in those behavioral questions for interviews are asked the most. And my friend heard me iterate over and over again until she was like, okay, that sounds good. That sounds better than what we started with. So definitely recommend if you can use your parents, your siblings, your friends, anyone just to practice and mock interview as much as you can. I think that will ease the nerves is one of the things I found. And so with that being said, what is like the one thing that each of y'all would go back and during the interview or after the interview that you realize you could have done differently? I know actually you kind of already talked a little about the resume in itself, but during the interview, what are some things? I know one of the tips I was told is holding on to something cold before you go, because you always have those kind of sweaty palms that I get at least. And so holding on to a cold glass of water, if they offer you a bottle of water, getting something cold in your hands just to kind of soothe and calm you. So that would be my tip. Take advantage of cold waters that are handed to you at interviews, at least then in person. Now probably more remote. So if you have access to some ice water at home, just get a glass next to you and hold on to it.
That's awesome.
I think it's understanding you're like, look, guys, here, I'm sitting here spinning this because it helps me like calm my nerves. Like, so it's understanding like yourself in that way. Like I have a playlist that I play, power posing, like whatever it is for you to just get that nervous energy out, like is so important. Because then it'll allow you to truly shine and show your true self in that interview process, which is what the employers are looking for anyway. So I would say find those things that kind of help get that out for you and help you kind of feel confident through that.
Yeah.
I've been doing some research on that one too, as I was thinking about that question from the notes you passed out, Oscar. But a couple things I would do differently, or things that I would do now that I didn't do then, was just being a lot more honest with myself about where I am, what I know, and most importantly, what I don't know. I've learned that it's okay to say that you don't know something, or it's okay to say, hey, I've I've heard of that concept before, like recursion or mapping or other things like that. I think that I understand it to mean blank, but showing your own vulnerability, like this is where I am, this is what I'm learning, really shows a lot to an employer. One thing I've learned very much not to do, now that I'm also interviewing people here at Levvel a little bit too, is don't fake it. If you say with confidence, but you are wrong, you're going to get a big X real quick. for me, I saw the note on there from Crystal about how sales is relevant. Yes, in my case, I'm good with getting in there and chatting and connecting with the people, but my strongest suit is not going to be a very deep part of the tech stack in talking at the same level that I perceive computer science majors to be able to talk on those issues. Some of the things that have really helped me have been just, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and on Twitter, I try to follow a lot of topics that I'm interested in just to know some of the buzzwords, some of the issues that people run into, to know what's trending and whatnot. And that helps me to be able to speak on, whatever topics there are. Other people that have gone different routes have contributed to open source is a big part of getting out there and getting familiar with things. Writing a blog about what you're learning, because I feel like now I've learned that employers aren't looking for you to know everything. They want you to be a part of a team, and they want you to be able to learn. So I think demonstrating those two things can really set you apart from others.
Yeah, 100%. The point that kind of stood out to me the most, Luke, you mentioned there at the end of writing a blog, just because sometimes you might think that the world has enough of X, Y, or Z, right? That you're starting out, but the tech changes so much every single day that the blog that you're making today is relevant to the person that's learning tomorrow. It might not be relevant, 5 years from now, but you're helping someone, and that kind of stands out that you are good at writing technical documentation, which I think a lot of us want to be better at. So that is huge. So that really stood out to me of just trying to write a blog, trying to document what you're learning, and it shows kind of a trajectory of growth for yourself when you're looking back 10 years from now and like, oh my gosh, this is me 10 years ago learning how to just console log something into the console. So definitely recommend that. Ugo, what are some pointers that you have?
Yeah, I mean, I think Luke made some really good points too. Like, like you're definitely not gonna know like everything. I know sometimes we also look at, job applications, and they're like, you need 5 to 10 years, like all these stacks, and you're kind of just looking like, oh, I don't even know that word. Like, I like, don't even know what that means. And, like that's completely fine, because honestly, I think most of the learning, most of this learning that you'll do is at the job. It's like, coding boot camps in school kind of really just give you like a really good basis to go off of, what software engineering is, or tech is. But that real true learning, you're going to do it like at the job. So it's, I think initially you should really be confident in like what so like, obviously maybe if you're going in front end, you talk about, I love focusing more on like CSS, JavaScript, HTML, all those things, or back end and things like that. But I think definitely just being confident, and definitely I like to do what I like to do too is like rehearse before an interview. Like I even just call my friends up and be like, hey, can you like pretend, like this is a mock interview? Like that to me helps a lot, just because you actually talk through the scenario, because just talking it out loud definitely helps a lot. Just so even your friend can be like, you're saying you're not paying correctly, or you're not saying the right thing. So that for me helps a lot.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Ugo. And really, there was one concept I learned at one point. I can't remember who shared this piece of knowledge with me, but they were saying that if you're ever going to get on stage and do some form of presentation or something, it can be the first time you're actually on the stage, but it doesn't have to be mentally. You could have gone through the scenario like 500 times in your head, and even doing that practice mentally will establish a little bit more of confidence for yourself when you're up there. Even envisioning like, oh, what if someone asks a question? How would I pause? How would I do that? So doing that for interviews is a similar scenario where I think has helped me a ton, practicing and preparing for different scenarios that I'll be in a public speaking space. And public speaking can be one person where it's the interviewer, or it can be, several people like today where we're in front of y'all. So with that, I do want to touch on this question of, y'all have gone a little bit into what the challenges and opportunities of having a non-traditional path into the tech industry is, which was one of the questions that we had. I think the other one that I want to touch on with each of you is, what are some of the challenges and opportunities of working for a large tech company, and then also, or a small one if you've only done one or the other. So we'll start off with Ashley.
I've worked for both. they are very different. There are challenges to both. There's good things to both. A lot of it just depends on what you want and what you value and your experience. So with your bigger tech companies, they've already gone through the journey of building. They have already gone through a lot of that like trial and error of building the company and understanding what works and what doesn't. So with that, like the pros are that like the processes exist. It's really easy to kind of get in and fall in and understand your role and work within that because they've already figured it out. Whereas smaller companies, there's a lot more of just the like, let's try something, let's see if it works, let's pivot. Like there's a lot more flexibility in that. That was something I loved, like working for a small company in Levvel at the size of it. There's opportunity in that. It gives you a lot of opportunity to help influence and shape things as they grow too, which is really cool. But not everybody's looking for that. We definitely hired people who are like, oh my gosh, this is too much like flexibility and I need to like go back to something more structured. So they're just very different. They give you two very different experiences and two very different perspectives. Is one better than the other? Like, no, I wouldn't say that. It just depends on you and what you want and what you value in that experience. But I do advise as you journey into your career, like try different things, try different company sizes, try product, try consulting. They're all different and they'll all give you great experiences and shaping to learn what you really value and what you ultimately want.
Yeah. Don't know that I could have said that much better myself. 100% agree. Luke?
I can't really speak to large companies too much. I guess now that we're part of Endava, maybe we're a large company. Insert shrug. But working with small companies, I've really enjoyed it. I found that I went to like a community college for like a semester and did 15 hours. I did a full-time student and did intro to networking, intro to security, intro to databases, just all the things. And I learned that my interest was in web type stuff. And that falls under the umbrella of mostly smaller companies, it seemed. But I've had good experiences. It can be a little harder to get your foot in the door for small companies because you tend to have to know someone and they tend to hire those that you know. It's not to say it's impossible, but it seems that was my experience versus larger companies. You might get the feeling that you're more than a number, especially as you're getting your foot in the door and getting started. So that can make it a little bit easier, I think. I don't know. But just like Ashley was saying, there's a lot of differences. There's pros and cons. I feel like my experience getting started about 5 or 6 years ago might be a lot different than right now. Back then, the stereotype was that bigger companies were less flexible and you had to come in and you had to be on premises. Even the past year or two, that might be changing. I'm not sure. But yeah, there's just definitely advantages, disadvantages of both.
Yeah, I agree with the piece of really just, even if you get your first job and it's a big company and you start filling it out and it doesn't work out, pivoting and being okay with that, especially having gone through like an untraditional path into tech, already gives you that kind of confidence in knowing like I can pivot. I've already done this before, so there's no fear in pivoting again if you need to. And to that end, I think with large companies, it definitely, I think, from my experience, has been easier to jump in without knowing everything versus smaller companies nowadays, especially with startups. I think it's like they really need someone to know one good tech really well, and so it might be harder to like land that role versus at a bigger company where they're okay, like because they can backfill of like, oh, maybe you don't know JavaScript, we have someone that does, and they can help onboard you versus a smaller company. So not to say that, like Luke said, it's impossible, but there might be some hurdles that are different to each opportunity. Ugo, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, from my experience from going to Bank of America to Levels, not saying Level or Endava now, it's a smaller company, but Bank of America being the giant company that it is, I definitely felt like I was like a smaller piece of the puzzle. And I'm not necessarily saying that's bad, but there's 100 people doing almost the same exact thing, but you're kind of like, you know, a big help or like a big, or like just a puzzle piece to maybe like an application or something specific to that big company. And for me, I took that as like, you know, a great way to like learn, because like also Oscar mentioned, you know, like they might have, you know, other people to do what I was doing, but you know, for me coming in obviously brand new to the tech space, to this new role, it kind of did leverage and helped me a lot just to learn or like solidify more of like my tech skills and like what I was doing for like that specific role at that time. And so that to me helped me. But also you could see it on the other side too, where, you know, like a smaller piece of the puzzle, I felt like, you know, it's like, where could I necessarily go after this? Where could I, you know, land the next like bigger like role or like the next possibility? So, you know, that for a bigger company, I kind of felt like a smaller piece. But here at Level, you know, I definitely feel like you work in like I would say like smaller groups or just like more tight knit community, I would say. And so you're like able to really kind of amplify like your skills as well, but in a, I guess, different scale. I don't know if that made sense, but for me, it was like kind of a little bit different. And I just feel like I can talk, you know, to a lot more different people here at Level / Endava. And, you know, I will say I probably like Endava a little bit better just because, you know, I really like talking to everyone and, you know, learning everything from even the clients that we work with as well. So that was my experience.
I think it's definitely a similar experience that I've had of the company I came from before coming to Level and Dava has been that we were still in a tight knit group. I think with Level though, because it's was, you know, about 300 employees. I think, Ashley, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's roughly where we were at when I joined. It was also kind of easier to just see the entire horizon of what each people were capable of, what each people kind of enjoy, their passions, versus before we were, I think, close to like 3,500 people when I barely interacted with maybe like 15 at a time. And I knew historically a couple more people because I'd been at the company for 4 years, but it was harder to see what the whole horizon looked like, what everyone was kind of involved in. And a Level was a little bit easier. And as we go into Endava, I think that'll still be that kind of the case because it's kind of a culture that we formed. And so you'll get kind of exposure to that early on to any company that you go to of what it looked like. But also, I think, don't get discouraged if it's one or the other. Being purposeful with what you are seeking out and kind of voicing that out to your manager, to your peers, and trying to insert yourself into different spaces, you can still get there as well. Mm-hmm. If anyone is starting to like kind of craft some questions, Crystal, I love the commentary that you've been having in here, especially the one about like agreeing about not knowing everything. I actually had a similar experience where one of my friends had been in the space for 5 years and I was just starting out. And my manager at the time was telling us like, why don't y'all use this technology? And he was like, oh, I've never heard of that. And that to me was like the first like chip off of the ice of saying I can be okay with this, like not necessarily going straight into imposter syndrome, because if he's been in this space for 5 years and hasn't heard of that tech and I'm just starting, like, okay, not everyone will always know how to do something. And so that gave me some peace of mind with that example. So if anyone else has questions, feel free to start dropping them in the chat, raise your hand. I think Alex, now's a good point to kind of open it up for questions for the general group.
Yeah, sounds good. Does anybody has a question for them? Feel free to ask or share.
Yeah, even anything that kind of resonated with you that you might have already kind of encountered. I know each of you are probably at different paths in your footsteps into tech now as it stands.
While we wait for some questions, Oscar, just what you said off of knowing everything. I remember when I was first kind of navigating into this career, I was talking to a good friend of mine who had been in it for a very long time. He was an architect at that point. And I was like, well, what's it like? Like, what do I need to know? And he was like, nah, like, I just get paid a lot of money to Google crap all day. Like, and I was like, what? Like, what? But then you step into it and you realize that, like, yeah, like you learn through experience and you build foundational skills, but you're going to always encounter things that you don't know and new problems. And that's why it's good to have a support system. That's why it's good to be a professional Googler and understand your tools and resources. But it's so true. We actually just recently changed our early talent interview process, so that to take that pressure off of in the technical interview of feeling like you need to know all these things instead of like drilling with like technical questions. We changed the format to be like a code review. Like if you were part of our team, and I was your lead, like, let's just walk through your code. Like, let's talk about it. Let me hear like the decisions that you made. Like, let me give you some feedback and see how you respond to that. Because at the end of the day, like, that's what we're really looking for. The skills you can learn, like, but what we're looking for in that is like, can you be a good team member? Can you respond to feedback? Can you critically think? What happens when you're faced with something that you don't know? Like, do you sit and wait for somebody to come to you, or do you like go chase down answers and research and try to find it? So we made an effort to change that, just to change the narrative around like what that interview is. And we just finished that process, and it was really cool to see the feedback even coming from our interviewers, because as reading that and making decisions of who to offer or not, I was like, wow, like I can really see what it's like to work with these people now. Like, this is really cool. So yeah, just like when you were talking, Oscar, it made me think about all those things.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think that leads in a little bit to Crystal's question here about speaking on how to find companies that have cultures that suit you. Like, what are some cues to look for? And I think that comes a lot in the interview process, right? And I'll open it up to Luke, Hugo, if y'all want to share a little bit, like kind of what cues y'all were looking for during interviews to see if that culture seemed, to resonate with y'all and to pursue that kind of opportunity.
Yeah, well, I can talk about, some of my experiences doing the interviews, not specifically for like Levvel and down, but I remember, mostly applying and trying to do like some of interviews, and like Oscar mentioned, it's just like sometimes you kind of just get the vibe of the employer just by the interview, because sometimes I might just ask you like daunting questions that, you're just like, is this interview like, really for me? Like, it's, you kind of just really feel like when you're interviewing, you're like, is this how they work? Is this how, they go about things? So it's like you can really kind of wage a lot in the company, like just by the interview. But, also doing your research as well. Also, I feel like talking to people too, because, I think people will definitely be very honest about, their jobs. So I think, if you know someone you want to apply for the same company, I think definitely talking to people definitely will help as well.
Yeah, I agree. And for me, it was in the beginning, I couldn't really concern myself too much with cultures. I had to get a job. So I was fortunate that my wife was working as well. And at that point, we didn't have kids. So there was a little bit more flexibility, but, push came to shove, like I had to take that first job. And even though the pay wasn't amazing, I learned a lot. And so I took that with me to the next job and realized that some of those skills I learned from like a WordPress marketing agency was I learned about IP addresses. I learned about DNS records. I learned about how to migrate and backup and debug and talk with customers on the phone. So when I went to my next job, those skills weren't really listed, but those helped me stand out. And I'm kind of swaying into a different question, but the cultures that suit me, I had a little bit more leverage in the second job in tech than I did at the first. So another thing I learned is like, if you look around, even in this call right now, everybody is different than the person beside them. We all have different experiences, different values, different concerns and stressors in life and family situations and this and that. So you want to find a job that's willing to support you there. If they, I feel like you're looking for red flags for them too, because not only are they interviewing you, you're interviewing them to see, like if you do balance life with kids and other things, or if you don't really have those obligations, that's pretty telling about what a company, whether a company will be a really good fit or not.
Yeah, Yeah, and I think that even ties into a lot of the efforts now in a lot of the industry is with diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? Where it's not just necessarily around ethnicity and skin color, but also like diversity in age, diversity in family situations. And with what you mentioned, Luke, of one of the questions I thought about while me and my wife don't have any kids, one of the questions I'd still ask about is like, how many people do you work with that have children? You know, how does that look like in the spectrum of who's going to have to go pick up their kids after daycare, right? And making sure that it's not seen as a detriment, but rather just it's life. You know, people have things and responsibilities to do, and as long as the work gets done, you know, what kind of culture are you promoting? Are you promoting a culture where you need me to stay after hours forcefully, or are you okay that I have to go pick up my kid or that I walk my dog? You know, some people have dogs as well, and having those responsibilities throughout the day. It's definitely good questions to think about as y'all go through this. And I think to the piece that you were getting into, Luke, of setting yourself apart, that's also kind of that you're looking how does that company set themselves apart too, right? What is unique about this company, even though they might be promoting a specific mindset.
Yeah.
And Alton, go ahead, Luke.
One thing that came to mind, though, I thought about a specific example was this company here in town in Greensboro. I got to the second interviewer with the tech team. And during that interview, they actually started telling like inappropriate jokes and they were kind of making fun of somebody that wasn't there. And I was like, look, man, no, that's not going to really work for me. That wasn't really something I valued. That culture was a big red flag. And I ghosted them. I didn't want to. I was like, okay, you're on my X list. I'm glad I got in there to talk with them. I practiced an interview, but I learned, no, that's not really where I want to be.
Yeah, and I think actually reading up the chat earlier, I think Krista, you pointed out of how if it's an opportunity that doesn't work out, realizing that it might not necessarily, you know, it's not necessarily on you. It's just rather it wasn't the fit for you, and that's okay. Move on to the next one. And Luke, that was a great example of how to kind of realize that and be okay just moving ahead and seeking out other opportunities. Alton, I see your question here and about whether we think it's important to have a college background, specifically in the tech field. And I think, you know, having, I think, different traditional paths that we all four of us have, our answers might lean into this. And the one aspect that I think because I do have a bachelor's, I was fortunate to have a scholarship that allowed me to get that. I think my advocacy for college is if you have a way and a means to do it without incurring a significant amount of cost and loan debt, I think it's definitely worth the experience of going to college, getting that under your belt, because I think there's a lot more of personal development at college that you gain as well, not just, you know, the classes that you take. So that would be my advocacy of you could definitely take a college path forward and explore that route. But if there's an opportunity that's less of a cost to you, I would definitely advocate for that piece. And I'll let Ashley, Luke, Ugo pipe in if y'all have other thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think you're so right, Oscar. Like the college piece of it is a lot about the experience. But in terms of getting a job, like the reality is there are a lot of still very traditional companies that you're going to get knocked out of some HR system if the scanning bot that scans your resume as part of like the application process doesn't see a 4-year degree. Like that still exists out there. I think the really cool thing about our industry though is we've been pushing like the boundaries on that like for a long time. And I think we're starting to see a lot of changes in that where people are removing that requirement. They're realizing like that's not the only path to getting a job. But it's been really cool. Like some of our coworkers here, some are self-taught, some are 4-year degrees, some are boot camp, some are other like, but at the like they all perform at the same level. So it doesn't really matter how you get into this. So I would just say like don't discount yourself if you don't have that in the application process. For some companies, like, yeah, they're going to look at it, but there's a lot now, especially in our world that don't like, that's not a requirement. So if it's something that you can do and you have the means and like do it for yourself. I even tell people that about master's degrees, because I don't think they hold the weight that they once did. Do it for yourself, but don't let it hold you back because you don't have it.
Yeah, and I will talk on my experience because I don't have a degree. So, you know, obviously I did try to go to college because, you know, we all think that's the path to go. You know, we're always told, you know, you have to go to college. And, you know, like we all mentioned, it's obviously very important, but, you know, I didn't have the means to go to college and, you know, I didn't want to get into like debt. So that's why I just started working, but I knew I wanted to get into the tech space. So that's, the main reason why I did a boot camp, because I knew for me that was definitely an investment, and I knew that investment, if I put in the work and I knew, that I really wanted it, I knew it was gonna, uh, you know, get me a job, and I'm here now, so I can say you definitely don't need a college degree, but I'm also not saying don't go to college. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually think back to one of my friends who was actually on the team that I first started off at Red Ventures after finishing the boot camp I went through. He got into this program called Road to Hire, also based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. And he was 18, 19 when he first started the program, finished it back in 2014, and is now like a senior engineer, has 6 years of experience, and never went to go get a degree either. And he didn't have the means either, but just kind of focusing and really finding that niche that worked for him, and learning more on the side. Obviously, we have different paces that we each kind of learn things at, and that's okay. It's kind of worked out for him where he hasn't even looked back to consider getting a degree. So I definitely think that, like everyone said, it's really about the personal development. College can be a facilitator for that, but you can always do that on your own as well in different means. Yeah, of course.
Do you guys think that it's necessary to have some type of certificate even after you're already in the field?
Certificates are interesting, I think, just because I don't know that there's like a specific, especially with boot camps, I don't think that there's a certificate besides just saying completion certificates. I think at the end of the day, with some kind of themes that we've seen, is really about, can you collaborate? And I don't think there's a certificate of like a collaboration certificate. I think, if we could kind of get a personality basis on what that looks like, that might be great. Although once you're in it, I think for me, looking at the technologies I've used like AWS, Azure, certificates in that sense kind of makes sense. I don't know, and people can have different opinions here and share them, of how much I guess it is looked at the first job. Ashley, I saw that you unmuted.
Yeah, I was similar mindset of, I think once you get in it and you find kind of those niche areas that you want to explore more, there are certain areas, especially with the cloud technologies, that certificates are beneficial to have. From entering into the field, like, does it look better on your resume if you have them? Like, I'll say no. Like, I think it's just a more education you can get. So again, like, I look at it as, if that's something that you're interested in and that provides you with a path to learn more that you're interested in, like, go for it. But I don't think anybody's gonna look at your resume and say like, oh, this person has 2 certificates and this has none, like, I'm gonna go with this person. No, it's just more about kind of how you can come into the team, what foundational knowledge you have, versus like just collecting certificates and those kind of things.
How about like your portfolio or something like that?
Yeah, so I don't know if I'm a different believer on this. I think requiring portfolios actually puts more diverse candidates at a disadvantage. If we think about a lot of people who come in untraditional paths or have other family obligations, working moms or people caring for other family members, like, you don't have time to do those things. Like, that's just the reality. So I think they're good. I think they're another way that can just showcase like what you can do and your thought processes and how you approach problems. You're going to find some places that will value them, just like everything else. You'll find places that value these things and some don't. But I'm a believer in the interview process should assess your skills. If you have things to bring to the table, great. But the weight is not on those things as a requirement.
Yeah, and I think for portfolios, again, it kind of depends on what you're trying to set yourself apart. I think any kind of, if you have a GitHub, if you have any kind of sort of repo management system for your own portfolio, that kind of serves the purpose of, even the learning courses that you might have taken are super helpful to just showcase that you've taken, the time to set up a repo to kind of do that. Because once you are, if you're looking for a developer specific role, then having those skills in Git management and anything like that is really helpful to showcase in that regard. And Crystal, I see your question about meetups. I think I found one when I was out in Nashville for women in tech that even though I don't identify as a woman, I thought it was super helpful for me to put myself in that space. And so I attended one of the meetups, and I thought it was really interesting for me to become more aware of the challenges and the issues around that. And I found that just on the app Meetup. So I definitely recommend checking out the Meetup app. There's other networks that I personally have subscribed to that are Tequeria, which is Latinx in tech. I'll put some what's it called, links here in the chat for both. And there's another one that's Blacks in Technology as well. I know that there was one more I can't remember right now, but definitely just doing a Google search in general for these kinds of groups are super helpful, and I found them, very insightful to just resonate with others that are finding themselves in the similar positions that you are whenever you're starting out in tech. I see, Shayla, you asked a question here. Let me read. Which one of like working for technical interview prep with a career advisor or reading interview books? Does someone from the group want to take that?
I'll say a little bit about the prep. I mean, I think obviously we talked about you're not going to know everything, but I think coming in, if knowing a little bit of everything is good, but I think even if you come in with like knowing something like super strong, like one language that like super well, like let's say you studied Python, like for a couple months and you're like super like cool with it, you can definitely leverage that and say, I'm super comfortable with like Python. And obviously you can say like, you have maybe built like, one or two applications and stuff like that. And definitely like reading some books about coding. I know algorithms are a big thing in like job interviews too. And kind of doing a little bit of research as well. Just like, you don't have to go super in depth with like learning about how every technical interview goes, because, they'll all be different, but, having kind of some kind of basis for it, I think that would definitely help you as well.
I think the books are good in the way that they give you like a very tactical way to practice some of the problems that you might get asked. Then just practice with your friends, like Oscar said. I always offer my team for people, like, so I'm volunteering my team here. Like we love to work with individuals in the community. We've done mock interviews for a local boot camp. And just that practice will help give you the reps. Use your resources too, like Glassdoor. There's a lot of websites like that you can go see what other people's experiences interviewing are, and that can sometimes help you prepare. But yeah, I think the practice is just one of the biggest things, getting those reps in.
Thank you.
That's a good question, Alton. And I was actually thinking of this, where I think some companies still practice, and I think that this will be different, as kind of Ashley alluded to, changing the way that we do some recruiting efforts now, where we're doing a little bit more of a code review interview versus I think there's some experiences that I've had where it's just you walk in and you just try to solve some algorithm problem. And I can't say that I've ever used an algorithm problem in my day-to-day job the way that it's expected in an interview. I think, we naturally gravitate towards finding an algorithm at the end of the day whenever we're solving issues, but not in the same way that you have to memorize. When you find this solution, or this problem, you immediately have to lean towards this solution as the elegant and best solution forward. So it's always going to be a challenge to find that balance between the initial interviews and then what you're actually going to end up doing. But with the field still being a lot of practices where it is on the spot coding, I definitely encourage you to practice those and take them almost like a math test, where you're just going to be asked, find a formula and solve, and be prepared for that. But afterwards, the role may be different from what you're actually doing in an interview.
Yeah.
I think it matters. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Luke.
I'd say also it depends on what job you're applying for. If it's an entry level, if it's your first job, they're going to be a little bit more understanding that you may or may not understand certain concepts. If you're applying something a little bit more advanced, then they might expect you to know some of those concepts. And yeah, I've gone through on GitHub and some of these other websites about, they list a lot of interview questions, and I have found those helpful to know if there's any concepts that I'm really not familiar with. Maybe I need to learn those, or maybe I need to take a step back and realize that, hey, that position might be a little bit too far in the deep end for where I am now, but that can be a goal for like next year or something. You can learn anything you want. But yeah, there's great resources out there. Don't be intimidated, but also be aware that, you know, you're not expected to know everything, but depending on what role you're trying to step into, they're going to have certain expectations.
I was going to just say the context of the company matters too. So if you're going for a product company, likelihood the tech stack that they're interviewing you in for the interviews is what you're going to use on a day-to-day basis. For us, we're a services company, we're a consulting company, so we have team members across a lot of different tech stacks. So if you interview in one tech stack, there's a likelihood in your journey, like you might do something different. That's all driven by your own personal goals and things. But I think understanding the context of the company that you're interviewing with will matter too in answering that question.
So it looks like we are at time. We want to be respectful of your time. Are there any closing arguments or anything that you guys want to share, or any last questions that anybody has?
On my end, I just want to say thank y'all for showing, and thank y'all for anyone else that's going to be watching asynchronously. I know I have a hunch that people will continue to watch this afterwards, because this is the best way to move ahead and just understanding exposure to the industry and what it looks like. So thank y'all, and we'll sure to be in touch and maybe potentially set up something else with Code the Dream down the road, Alex, and see how we can continue to collaborate as well.
That'll be amazing. Thank you all so much for your time.
Thank you guys.
Yeah.
Thank y'all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
See y'all.
Thank you.